Hi, everyone. This is Rick John Count with Project Yano in San Diego. I'm going to be the moderator today and share comments as we go along. We're also going to hear from most of you, I hope, at some point. I am going to show you, well, first of all, let's start with the very first slide here so that you know, if you didn't already, who is sponsoring this webinar. It's being sponsored by the National Network Opposing the Militarization of Youth, and it's being hosted by the American Friends Service Committee. They are the ones who are providing this wonderful device for us to meet online with, and they're also providing Diana Talyansky as our tech support person. So we're very grateful to AFSC for their contribution here. NNOMY is a network of organizations, and my organization in San Diego, Project Yano, is just one of the member groups in that network. I am going to be the one who will be moderating and coordinating it, but we have several other people on this call as well in this meeting who represent other organizations that are part of NNOMY, so you'll hear from them from time to time as well. What I want to do right now is just point out what we have already covered, because there are several people on this call who were not on the earlier calls. They weren't in the earlier sessions. So I just want to make sure everybody knows where we are at this point. We began in the first part, in the first session, basically just brainstorming and identifying different elements that could go into an effective policy on recruiting. And policy making is the focus of this webinar. We're not presenting a workshop on counter-recruitment and how to effectively organize in the schools, for example, only insofar as it has to do with policy making, organizing for policy making. That's what our focus is this time. Those other topics are important, but they have to be dealt with separately when there's more time to just focus on those things. And if you have questions about any of those other aspects of this work, you can always contact us and ask your questions or ask for resources, and we'll help you. In part two, we had 3 presenters who represented campaigns that were waged in their local communities, and they talked about their experiences and the kind of policies that they were campaigning for and the lessons that they learned. In part 3, which is today, we're going to continue some of that discussion and see if there are any carryover points that we weren't able to cover by the end of the last session, and also find out if you have any questions that you've thought of that didn't get addressed in the last session as well. 2 of the co-presenters who were in that session, Kate Connell from Santa Barbara and Pat Elder from Maryland, are on the line. They're going to be part of this meeting, so anything that has to do with their presentations, you'll be able to ask them directly. Amy Wagner could not make it to this session. She is in New York City, and I know that, in fact, we had to shorten her presentation because of a technical problem that was on her end. And she didn't get around to discussing some of the challenges or the key factors for their success. So I'm going to kind of represent her in a way and talk a little bit about that from what I know about the New York campaign, but also from what I know about the San Diego campaign that we waged here. So that's the agenda for today, and I'm going to move forward. There's some specific items for today that I hope we're going to talk about that have to do with the carryover. For example, we started to talk about, in the last session, about the solicitation of contact information directly from students by recruiters in schools, and we didn't really get to talk about that too much, so we should try to clarify that and add a little to that. What was never mentioned was meeting with school board members, or at least it wasn't addressed in any kind of detail. And I want to bring that up because I think that was a key factor, meeting with officials, especially in New York City where Amy was organizing. And then issues of implementation and enforcement. That was something that we started to talk about, but didn't get into much detail on. And I know that Amy in New York has been grappling with that, and as have we in San Diego. We did not get around to identifying the keys to success in New York, at least if we did, it passed me by. So maybe we can talk a little bit about keys to success, and I can share with you what were the keys for us in San Diego, where we were able to pass not only a recruiting policy, but before that, a policy concerning junior ROTC. And then if there are any other issues, we can go into those as well. Another thing we want to do during this session, before it's over definitely, is we want to hear from you and find out if you have been thinking specifically about what you might do in your community, and whether you have any ideas or plans for policy-related activism. And then find out if you have any questions that you'd like to throw out for people to respond to regarding your own local needs and what you're planning in your community. If we have the time towards the end, then we're going to talk a little bit about other goals beyond local school district campaigns, and a couple of those that I threw up there on that slide for a Part 3 agenda. A couple of them are junior ROTC policy making and statewide policy making. Those are things that we alluded to in the previous sessions, but we never got around to addressing in any detail. So if we have the time, we'll do that. But again, the primary focus of this webinar is policy making in the local school districts. We're going to go on now and just find out here whether anybody right off the bat had any questions from the last session or even the first one that you'd like to pose right now and see if anybody has answers to. And Stephen, you're online and you're our scribe. So do you remember how to access the writing tools? Yes. Okay, upper left corner, and try to position them so that there'll be room to put not just the question but an answer. So let's find out right away. If anybody has a question that carries over from the previous sessions, can you raise your hand and unmute yourself? Not seeing any so far.
Should we give the folks on the phone a chance?
Yes, the phone callers who are listed here differently, we should unmute them to see. Kate has her hand up, so why don't we start with you, Kate?
Yeah, hi. This is actually, I guess, is a question for Pat, because I am very interested in the difference between a policy that's at a district level versus a county, because Santa Barbara we have a policy that we passed here at the district level only covers like 4 schools. Santa Barbara County is much bigger, but I don't know what the autonomy for each district, if they would be covered by like the Santa Barbara County Education having a policy that they would then say, okay, you districts in Santa Maria and Carpinteria and Lompoc, you guys have to adhere to this policy. So I guess that's what I'm wondering is if if that's usually something where the districts get to decide, or if the county, if we got something at the county level, that would be, the districts would have to follow that.
Well, every state's different, Kate, and I mean, I can only, with any degree of accuracy, speak to Maryland, and then to a lesser degree, perhaps, New York and Connecticut and New Hampshire, and a few others maybe. Rick would probably have a better handle also of California, but I mean, the way it works in Maryland is in each individual school falls under a county school district. And there are 23 counties in the state of Maryland, and everything's divided up politically that way. So in my county, Montgomery at the time, there were 18 high schools. St. Mary's County, where I am now, it's more rural. It's twice the land, but there are only 3 high schools. So, and then, so you You can have a policy that an individual principal will pass, but then you can have a policy that an entire school system, like the Montgomery County Public Schools, will pass, and that will cover 18. And then the next step up is the Maryland State Department of Education, MSDE. And it's possible for them to have a policy that is binding on each of the 23 sub-jurisdictions or counties. So, it's of course tougher as you go up the rung. It's funny because we were able to pass several policies in a half dozen or 8 or 10 different jurisdictions throughout the state, but we had a really nasty militarist superintendent of state public schools who wouldn't have anything to do with us. And so we couldn't get anything done statewide, and we had to go make an end around with the state legislature in order to try to pass laws, which we did. We have the only 2 laws in this country, one for the opt-out and the other for the ASVAB. So, but maybe Rick can answer that.
I can say a little bit about it, especially since Kate and I are both in California. Usually, at least in California, the county board of education does not set campus policies. The governance of that is handled by the local school district. What the Board of Education does mostly is regulate the disbursement of funds coming from the state. And once in a while, they will, I think, probably wander into other levels of policy making. But generally, you can't go to usually a county board of education, have them dictate recruiting guidelines. It has to be done by each school district's governing board. So does that answer your question as much as we were able to?
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't surprise me really because, I mean, I know that they, as far as like within a district, that they generally are going to want to be able to set their own rules and regulations. So it just makes it a little bit more of a challenge because basically, I'd have to build a coalition or work with, people in the various cities, and then, it's the whole thing of building the relationships with the schools and the school board. It's, so it's basically starting from the ground up. But in a way, I mean, that's how you're going to get the engagement anyway, is to have that. So. Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Any other questions from anyone who's in the meeting? Can you click your raise hand button and unmute yourself? Or if you're a phone caller, then just announce yourself and say you have a question.
Those of you on the phone, if you are capable, it'd be a good idea to just mute yourself locally on your phones. That way I don't have to mute you from my end, and then you do have the option to speak when you're inspired to. Thank you, folks.
Yeah, we cannot see the raised hand from people who are connected just by phone, so that's why we're doing it a little bit differently for the phone callers. Anyone?
Well, this is Barbara Harris.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm working on my issue of privacy statewide because district by district would be impossible at this point, although Amy and the American Friends Service Committee and New York Civil Liberties Union have gotten it done in New York City, because I was advised by senators to work with a group called the Board of Regents. And because the Board of Regents really sets policy actually over our Board of Education, they're the route I'm taking, so that ASVAB 8, the option 8, would be universal in our state. It would be a mandate in the state, not just in the city, because district by district would be almost impossible. But actually,
so
this is very, very difficult because I'm a New York City person to get my contacts throughout the state, and that's what we're working on.
So that's one thing that sets your state apart from some of the others. That your state regions, Board of Regents, have a little more say-so in local school district policy than they would here in California, for example. Although we have a state Board of Education in California, and they do sometimes dictate some policies here. But they're, unfortunately, the States Board of Education around the U.S. are part of an association of state boards of education, and it's extremely pro-military.
Oh, I know.
So if you wind up talking to a state board of education, be aware that they are linked to and networked with this association, and they're some of the strongest promoters of military recruiting in schools is this association that I'm talking about. Any others?
I just wanted to respond to something that Barbara said, and that is that, you know, her efforts and the efforts of others in New York are commendable, because they actually did get the Board of Regents to publish a letter regarding the administration of the ASVAB, and, you know, that letter, basically, you know, Barbara, you could speak to it. It didn't say, hey, mandatory option 8, but it did say, hey, we've looked at this, we think this is probably the way to go, and we're going to just let you know that this is what we think. Isn't that basically it, Barbara?
Yes, it was really an amazing letter, but it suggests that option 8 is selected. It doesn't mandate it. So I'm working for tweaking that letter, that it becomes, you know, the guideline for every district within the state. And New York City recently appointed a chief privacy officer to oversee privacy issues when it comes to students' private information. And so I'm connected to her now, because I think this is a route in New York State. Of course, it is different than other states.
Right. You know, one other quick point to tack onto that is that you know, there's a lot more bang for the buck if you work at a higher level. And a lot of activists spend a lot of time at the school level, but there really isn't that much more effort involved in reaching out to a district or even state level. And I mean, what you could call yourself a coalition, and you know, 2 or 3 people, and you just call yourself a coalition. And I just think that a lot of the work that we do should be directed district-wide and even especially statewide.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments that might be considered carryover from the previous sessions? No? Okay. Kate did ask a question to me in the chat window, so I thought I would share this with you, the answer. She asked what was the name of the association, the Boards of Education Association. And I don't have the exact name, but it's along the lines of National Association of State Boards of Education. And I don't remember now, Pat, you may recall this, but I don't remember exactly where they're based, but it's a national body. It has staff, and I kind of think it's on the East Coast, if I'm not mistaken. And they have such a close relationship with the Pentagon that I almost think they have offices there. So no, I'm just kidding, but that's how close they are. Okay, there were a couple of other issues that I do know that would be carryovers. One of them is regulation of recruiters collecting student contact information, and this was touched on briefly in the last session, but it's an important thing because some of us have in our policies prohibitions on the collecting of contact information. The recruiters have the ability to go to the school district and they can request student lists under the No Child Left Behind Act, and they'll get anybody's name and contact information who was not opted out of that list. So they only get access. They don't get access to everybody then, because some people do opt out. So they really push hard when they're in the school to try to get students to fill out contact forms, for example. So some of our policies specifically addressed that and said you cannot directly solicit contact information. Kate, maybe you could talk about how that was addressed in Santa Barbara, since there was even a bit of a discussion by the school board in one of their hearings about that.
Yeah. So it's this tricky thing because the schools have to give equal access to college and military recruiters as well as job recruiters, and so the schools really don't want to limit, my experience anyway, limit recruiters from having like a sign-up sheet if they have a table at a career fair, that kind of thing. So it's a area that they're sensitive to. So I mean, what recruiters tend to do, and what I witnessed recruiters doing at a career fair, is have these things that are like surveys that you have to fill out in order to do something like a chin-up, use a chin-up bar. And they'll ask questions. This question that was in Santa Barbara, they said, they're not really questions. Some of them said, oh, are you aware that you can get a $150,000 scholarship, or that the Marines have a higher standard of entry than University of California, Santa Barbara, things like that. And then the students, fill out the survey and put their contact info, which includes things like their gender and their email, things that go beyond what the high schools release. The high schools, I believe, release just like name and address. I don't think they give them date of birth, that kind of thing. But the problem is, what I discussed with the schools and what we discussed with the school board is that if you sign an opt-out form, you're supposed to not have the contact info released. And then if the Marines come at a career day and get you to a student to fill this out, they're basically ignoring the rights to privacy of families and the students by doing that. And it's interesting because the assistant principal called me after this career day where I tore up the Marines and Navy sign-up sheets, and she said, well, the parent, because I pointed this out, that parents were upset because they had opted out of being contacted by the military, and now their students was getting contacted by the military because the student had signed one of these forms that the military had. And she's like, well, those parents should really sit down and have a conversation with their student about not signing those sheets at these career days. And I just was amazed that she'd say this, because parents don't necessarily even know that the military comes onto campus. That's not something, when they send out these little announcements, if the school even does that to parents, they don't necessarily list that the Marines are going to be there. They just say, oh, career day. And they might list a couple of the organizations that are going to be there. Anyway, what are in Santa, it's up on the display here. What ended up happening with Santa Barbara is that in that spot, because they were concerned about colleges and job people not being able to sign people up, they put actively, that recruiters will not actively solicit. And it's on the first page, I believe. We replaced it with collect, because Santa Barbara High School, they wanted the recruiters just to be able to have a clipboard sitting there on their table and sort of passively getting student contact info. They felt that if the recruiters didn't request or call out to students, come sign up and get more information or whatever, that they weren't actively soliciting, they weren't asking for it. So they inserted this word, actively solicit, and I'm trying to see where that is exactly.
I don't think it's on the first page.
Yeah, because later in the guidelines, they kept our word that we put in. We put recruiters will not collect. So, yes, here it is. It's a 3B.
Everybody has a plus and minus symbol to zoom in, and if you click on the plus symbol, above and to the right of that document, it will zoom that section in.
Yeah, so it's like a loophole. It's making it vague, basically, where they put they're in 3B, recruiters, second sentence. Recruiters visiting schools shall not at any time actively solicit contact information directly from students. But later they left in, as I was saying, in number 5 onto page 3, it says in F, I think we said here, oh no, I'm sorry, G, recruiters visiting schools shall not at any time collect contact information. And we felt like that covered our bases as far as, you know, them having a clipboard. But I will just say, just to finish up here, that I spoke with a UCSB college recruiter, and she really wanted to be able to collect student contact information. I thought that, you know, that colleges didn't need it so much because they get so many applicants, but she said that she wanted that to be available because they build relationships with the students, blah, 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 blah. But so it is one of those difficult areas because, like I said, the schools are kind of stuck in this place where they have to give equal access, and, you know, they're not offering equal opportunities, colleges versus the military, but the schools are asked to treat them equally.
Okay, thank you. Another issue that came up was enforcement. And what they discovered in New York and what we discovered in San Diego was that even though we had gone to all this trouble to pass this policy and it had been sent out to principals, there were violations going on. Mostly it was this contact information violation, but there were others as well, like recruiters, instead of staying in one specific confined space, they were wandering around, which was a violation of the policy. So that's a challenge for any of us to find some way to make sure, first of all, to monitor, and secondly, to make sure that there is compliance. In New York, they produced this flyer for students, I believe, which basically asked them to notice if any of these guidelines are being violated, and if so, to contact the organization. I don't know whether they put, it looks like they're having them contact YaYaNet, so that would be the community group that worked on this. In San Diego, we produced this flyer. There are 2 on a page because it's you cut it in half. But again, it was designed to be sent out with students or handed out in front of schools, for example. And it's in Spanish also. That is the kind of thing that you may find yourself doing or having to do. And so it's something to consider. Parents can be visitors sometimes in schools, and they may observe violations. And if they do, then they should document them. If they've got phone cameras, take pictures and so forth. Students have phone cameras quite often, so they can take pictures as well. But you may need to do this. So that's one aspect of it that we didn't get into in too much detail before. Somebody asked, Bart asked about documents, flyers, and the policy document and so forth. At the end of the seminar, sometime in the next few days, we are going to send out a packet, and it's going to have in it the sources for a lot of these documents. And some documents will be included, but for policies, there is one web page that has links to over 20 different policies, and so we're going to just send you the link to that in the resource packet, and you can go there and find all these different ways that people have approached it, and it'll include the Santa Barbara policy document and the other ones that have been discussed. Okay, let me see. There are a couple of other. Does anyone have any questions about that so far, about the idea of monitoring and enforcement?
Good.
Okay, so one more thing. We talked about keys to success, or we tried to anyway, with some of the co-presenters last week on Friday. and not everybody had the time to go into detail about that. And so I want to talk a little bit more about keys to success, because these things didn't just happen. There were factors that came together that made it possible to convince school boards to pass these policies. And if you're thinking of organizing a campaign, I'm sure you want to know, what made it work, or were there things that got in the way and prevented it from working. I would say for us in San Diego, one of the most important things was to have students themselves become the lead. And this is just a photograph of one of the actions outside the school board meeting one day here in San Diego. Getting the students engaged for us was a very important factor of success. It's not a simple thing to do. And in some places, there's been no student involvement, but they've succeeded in getting policies passed. Okay, that's possible. But for us, it was pretty critical, because here in this community, it is so pro-military that it is really hard to get government officials to take stands like they did in our case. And having the students involved was one thing that I think made a difference. One way of getting student involvement and parental involvement is to really show that you are sensitive to and you understand overlapping issues, and you incorporate those overlapping issues. It means, what you put into your flyers, for example. This one, the yellow highlighting on this page those are the areas that I think illustrate what I'm talking about. In San Diego high schools, the students were, especially students in communities where the kids are underrepresented in college, they were very observant of the imbalance when they would go into their schools each week and see military recruiters but never see a college recruiter. So that was an important thing that they needed to speak about, and they needed to hear other people speak about. And then the other thing is that the emphasis on balance as the main objective was very important. It made it possible to break through some of the fear that school board members had of taking a stand on this issue. They realized that, it's not an anti-military movement, it's not an anti-military policy, it's a balance policy for balance, so that people would have access. And that was the other thing that was important. We also found out in the case of junior ROTC, which I was going to mention later, but one of the reasons that students got mobilized around the JROTC issue and opposed, there was never a demand that JROTC be removed from schools, because that is not a practical demand. But they got upset about it. They wanted to do something. And one reason was that the students noticed that classes that are very important for them to get into college were being cut back at the same time that JROTC was being introduced and supported at their schools. And so that became the refrain that everybody was talking about was, why is it that we're losing Spanish AP classes and AVID and college prep courses at the same time our kids or our peers are being put into junior ROTC against their will? And that is how we addressed the overlap in a way that got sympathy, got not just sympathy, but got active involvement from the students. And somebody, I think Seth, asked if we would send this flyer out, and yes, we'll include that in the packet, Seth. Any questions from anyone so far, or any experiences that you'd like to share about this, how to mobilize students, how to mobilize the people who are the main stakeholders in this work?
Well, this is Pat. We didn't have any students involved in our 5 or 6 year program in Montgomery County, Maryland. We mostly had parents, and You know, I think one of the keys was, you know, just establishing personal relationships with school officials. You know, people that lived in our neighborhoods, people that we got to know, you know, and you know, just you know, emailing them back and forth, and meeting with them several times, and kind of you know, just sticking with it over the course of a couple of years in some cases, and but no kids were involved. So I mean, there's lots of ways to go about this, but our program was mostly parents and just you know, like 60-year-old radicals.
It's good that you brought that up. And I think that was my point. It sort of depends on the climate of the community, and there are some communities where you can meet as non-students with school officials and succeed, and then there's some where you can't. This photograph here, the person on the left is a school board member. The person on the right is, in fact, a high school student, and we organized meetings as well here. But the important point here is meeting with the officials who are going to be making the decisions, and I think that's what Pat was saying, is that was a critical factor. Free has a question, I think, and we've had, go ahead and hope our connection is good. Are you there, Free? Hello? Free.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi. Yes, Free Palazzo, Atlanta, Georgia. I just want to, by the way, thank you so much for putting this on, and everybody else for what you all say. It's really lonely down here in Georgia. I want to make sure Quaker House gets mentioned a little bit late. Quaker House is in Fayetteville, near a very large Army base, and they actually help people who are in the military to leave the military. And they also have a anti-recruiting. On their website, which is quakerhouse.org, you can find Sergeant Abe, ABE, the honest recruiter. And they found somebody who's a pretty good cartoonist. And they have a guy dressed up in uniform who's a recruiter. And one of the resources is Sergeant Abe, complete the letter, and about lying on enlistment. And it goes through the enlistment form in detail, with Honest Abe explaining where the lies are. And it's really nice because it's on the web and the kids can go see it on their own. So I really recommend you go look. They've been there over 40 years, and they help so many people come out after they've realized they made a mistake. So we don't have to give up on our students if they get seduced into the military. Somehow I would like everybody to get some literature that lets them know, even if you do enlist, this is what you can do. You need to know about this resource.
The brochures, the counter-recruitment brochures that are out there, for the most part, they list the GI Rights Hotline, which is national, and and in fact, Quaker House is one of the components of that hotline. And
the GI Hotline. Yeah, they stole their phone number. And we had to create a new one for Quaker House. Yeah,
but the GI Rights Hotline is an 800 number that when you call it, it connects you to the closest counselor based on the area code you're calling from. So it's another nice way to get people.
But the website national. So could you repeat that since you're the moderator? Quakerhouse.org.
Quakerhouse.org. Right. They heard you. Okay.
Okay, I didn't know that.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's go on to Kate then. Now, Kate, you had a comment, I think, and is that right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I was just going to say that yes, overlapping issues I think are really important, especially if you have people who are kind of, positive about the military, that kind of thing. You don't necessarily have to emphasize that, but things like privacy, students' right to privacy, that's hot issue right now with all the stuff on, you know, the web or whatever with Facebook and all that. So, I mean, I think that just you could just focus completely on student privacy and the right to privacy, and that spreads not just to the student contact info, but like harassment on campus. You know, there's records of recruiters harassing students, sexual harassment, as well as just plain old, you know, intimidation. The weapons, I mean, one of the kind of, I don't know, it's like, I don't know if I want to call it positive, but these school shootings that have been happening over the last decade or so, you know, not having simulated weapons on campus, you know, stuff like that, I think can just connecting it to school safety. I was involved with a, you know, gun violence or, you know, controlling gun control stuff here, which we also did with the school board, completely connected it to school safety. It was all about that. And I mean, these are even, I don't even, you know, are there background checks on these recruiters the way that there are on, you know, instructional assistants and teachers and all these other people? Not necessarily. I mean, I don't know. Do they get background checks on these people? So, you know, there are some other overlapping issues, like you were saying, that if you, you know, just shine the light on that and not worry about this whole thing of, oh, but the military, they're our heroes, you know, just completely, you can almost avoid the subject.
I want to jump in real quickly. In Montgomery County, it became an issue, that is the background checks. And came to find out that military recruiters were the only personnel in the school system, not just in Montgomery, but throughout the state of Maryland, and it continues to today, that are allowed to be with children unsupervised, that have not gone through, you know, a criminal background check. And, you know, they're also the only people who are teaching classes who are not degreed personnel and certainly not licensed to teach. Meanwhile, most rank and file teachers have to have their master's degrees in 3 years. These guys have high school diplomas.
Okay. Let's spend a little bit of time, if we can, finding out from you all if you've been thinking about doing something locally and what specifically you've been considering, or if you have just some general questions about what you might do. This is a chance for you to ask people who are here who've had some of these experiences, so please talk to us about it. Anyone? Anyone thinking of doing something that has not thus far been involved in trying to achieve a policy change? Hmm? Seth?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks again for putting this together. I'm kind of the rep from our local group in Northwest Connecticut, so I'm kind of raising questions on behalf of them. So we have been in schools doing, you know, kind of standard kind of passing out literature and making visits every fall and every spring to the same set of schools. We recently got this data through the Freedom of Information Act that shows the Air Force has been in one school pretty heavily. This very same school also has a JROTC unit, I should add. And it shows things like these Air Force recruiters are able to give presentations to, in a school assembly setting, to all of the foreign language students. And they'll talk about, you know, how to become a linguist in the Air Force. And that sort of thing. So given that we have this data now, what would be the next step in trying to pursue some policy that would maybe prevent recruiters from giving presentations of that nature and capping the number of visits they can make per semester?
Okay, a quick answer to that would be to look look over the policies that are available online, because several of them have components that address that, and so there's no need to totally reinvent the wheel. You might be able to improve, but take a look at what they put in those policies. One thing you have to realize, though, if you set a standard or a cap or a rule for the military recruiters, it has to apply to everybody. So that's got to be part of your thinking, and when you work on that. And sometimes it gets complicated. So you may not be able to ban speakers in the classroom, because if you did that, you'd be banning yourself. But take a look at those policies, and when we send out the resource packet, it'll have the link to the page where you can look at over 20 policies, 20 different policies. I know that the one in Santa Barbara capped the number of recruiters who could be present on any day. But when you have a chaplain who's going to a class to talk about that kind of a job in the military, they're going to say, we're not recruiters. So it's a little complex, but it's been done. This language has been hammered out, and so again, I would take a look at those. But here's what you should do. I think take a look at those policies, see how they've been addressed, how the issue's been addressed. Think about your own community, and that's in Connecticut, right? Yes. Okay. Think about the community. Think about the environment, the political environment there, and then figure out your strategy. What would be the best strategy for you there? Okay. Thank you. Go ahead. Seth, are you still? Did you have another part of your question? We lost your sound.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just a real quick follow-up. Is there anything that could be done to so let's say the data that we have show also that recruiters are cultivating contacts among very young students, 15-year-olds. These are mentioned in the records. And the Air Force has this program where once you're in your junior year, you can sign papers with your parents' permission. So that means that when they're sophomores, they're being actively cultivated, their information is being collected, and recruiters are getting to know them. What can be done about that kind of outreach? Can we put any kinds of limits on the age of students that recruiters have contact with? Would that be tricky, just given the format of a table in front of the cafeteria?
I don't know that you have to limit it by age. Several of the policies simply say you cannot solicit contact information directly from students. It means they have to go through the regular channels that have been established to disseminate information under No Child Left Behind. They should go to the district office or wherever it's spelled out in the local district policy to get contact information. But you can simply say no contact information can be solicited or collected. I think the Santa Barbara language is good. No such information can be collected from students. And form your arguments. Your arguments would be there's no parent around. You've got parental rights, you've got guardian rights, and they're being violated. So I don't even think it has to be based on age. It can be across the board, K through 12. And you would want to cover older students as well. So any other comments?
This is Pat.
Yeah.
Real quickly, back to Seth. Seth, you've really gathered a tremendous amount of information through the Freedom of Information Act, regarding schools in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Is there a website where, we might be able to access it? Because some of the comments of these recruiters are outrageous. And you might also want to speak a little bit, Seth, on, exactly what you managed to get through your FOIA.
Well, I'd encourage anyone who wants to know more on this to maybe contact me, I don't know, offline somehow. Maybe Rick could put them in touch with me, because we're running low on time and I want to make sure that other folks get a chance to talk.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that.
That would be great. That'd be great. Thanks, Rick.
Anyone else who's thinking of plans for their community, what they might want to do?
Okay, this is Barbara. Steph also turned me on to the fact that there's Cadet Corps programs in middle school, and several of the members of my group want to address that. Has anyone done that? Have they been to middle school to talk to teachers or administration about the Cadet Corps, which is an earlier JROTC? I understand they like to be in the middle school when the hearts and minds of younger kids who are impressed, and therefore these young people will then join JROTC in high school. But I'd like to know if you've worked with any middle schools as well. It's very troubling to me.
Okay, anybody have a quick response to that?
No.
No? Well, let me suggest something, Barbara, and everybody else. When you're dealing with these curriculum programs, you can't quite approach it the same way you do recruiters. Okay, it's not the, it's apples and oranges almost. You have to have a different strategy, and this is why you know, JROTC is not an effective policy area to focus on because there's no way that you can get a policy that's going to limit them from being in schools unless you limit some of their activities. And what you've got to do is find out what are the activities that help bolster the program. Now, in middle school, this Cadet Corps thing, it's even another thing. It's a banana along with the apples and oranges, okay? In JROTC, there are activities that they engage in that people will find objectionable if someone brings it out. And those activities are designed to recruit students to the program, and marksmanship training is one of them. Another one is granting them PE credit. And so these are the things you should look at. Find out what is used to promote the program and see if there is leverage there that you can use to try to curb that activity and thereby undermine recruiting for the program. And you know, here's the other thing. With the Cadet Corps, there's no subsidy from the outside. The schools have to pretty much absorb all of those costs. So you need to figure out, you know, is this a school district or a school where they're under budget cuts and yet they're going to have to put some money into it, or is it completely after school? And that's often what it is, after school. You may not have the kind of leverage with those programs that you would have with junior ROTC, where there's school district money involved.
Okay, thanks. That was very helpful. Thank you.
I'm glad you brought it up. Any other thoughts? We're running out of time here. We might run a few minutes over, and if Diana needs to, she can check out and leave us here. We'll close the door when we leave.
Jumping in, can I just jump in? I raised my hand, but
yeah.
Okay. So just related to the middle school thing, one thing that's in the Santa Barbara policy is it says in general, this exhibit applies to all district schools K through 12. So it's not just applying to the high schools. It applies K through 12. So that, I think, might be a good thing to insert there if you're wanting to have some control lower levels.
When it comes to these curriculum programs, like the Cadet Corps and JROTC in particular, another weak point is if they're putting students in without requesting the student's permission or the parents. If you find out that counselors are assigning them to that class, that is something to bring up. That's something to make an issue out of. We're fortunate in California that we have a portion of the education code that bans involuntary placement in any military science course. So we can use that here. But even without that, there's definitely an argument that could be made about parental guidance and parental rights to put a stop to that sort of thing. And sometimes they won't run those programs unless they have a minimum number of students in it, and you can undermine that.
Okay, got it.
Any others? Seth, did you just raise your hand again?
Yeah, just to sort of wrap up, I guess, the thread that Barbara had started. I think, Barbara, at this point, we established that there are no middle school cadet programs in New York, although 2 have sort of been identified as possibilities. So I don't know if Rick or anyone else could speak to this sort of portion of our activism, which is really kind of all about minding our knitting, making sure that new programs don't crop up when we're not paying attention. So I don't know if anyone can speak to that or has strategies for that.
Anyone?
Well, that was our plan. I know I had spoken to the administration in each one of those schools, and they said they did not have the program. But we were going to follow up in September and actually visit the school and try to speak to someone and learn a lot more about what was being planned or not planned. But it's been in my mind, and so I brought it up. And I wanted to know if it was more national than just here. I know it is.
It is, but compared to junior ROTC, it's really pretty small.
Well, I know JROTC has been on my radar for years now.
Yeah, and once it's installed, JROTC is really hard to get out, as we've noted in earlier sessions. There's almost no way to do it. If you make a frontal assault on it and attack it publicly at the school board level, you'll lose. But there are other ways to remove a JROTC unit, and that includes things like working with the students to boycott it. And when the enrollment drops low enough, it's supposed to go by law, by military regulation. Or you work with school board members behind the scenes and educate them about the true cost of the program. But that can also work for any consideration of a middle school program if it's going to cost the district money. But I think maybe, Seth, what you're talking about here is that you kind of have to measure your resources and think carefully about this. Some things you just can't take on, especially if there are other things that are easier to address, that are urgent and are present at the moment. And so sometimes you have to make choices, and you might find all of a sudden something appears that was off your radar, or you knew it was a possibility, but hey, you have to decide: are you going to be focusing on getting a policy to restrict ASVAB testing, or are you going to be spending a lot of your attention or using a lot of your attention to focus on programs that aren't there yet? Those are the kind of choices that you have to make sometimes. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of resources for the work that we're doing, but we have very good dedicated volunteers in many places, and they can actually make a difference. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, choosing your issues.
Yeah, well, ASVAB is it, number one.
So we're just about out of time. What we did not get around to was a larger level of policy making at say the state level, although we've talked about what Pat and his coalition was able to accomplish in Maryland and in a few other states with the ASVAB test. Those are still strong possibilities anywhere. And when we send out the resource list, we're going to send you the link to the Student Privacy Coalition that Pat is with, and so you'll be able to go there and connect with them and look at what the kind of information they have about waging statewide campaigns, especially on the ASVAB test. There aren't too many statewide campaigns that you can wage on the military's presence in schools and do it effectively, but ASVAB is as Pat says, it's low-hanging fruit. So we will put that in the resource list.
Great.
Are there any final comments or questions at this point?
I'm going to open up the phone lines, so those of you that are just on the phone or where your phone isn't connected to your web presence, just, we're going to hear you.
Yep. If you're on the phone only, speak up and let us know you have something to share or a question to ask.
So I'll make this real brief. Thanks again for putting this on. I want to encourage more webinars of this type and more training locally. If we're on the line now, I can just offer as an example, this past February we had an excellent presentation in Hartford given by a representative from War Resisters League, Joanne Sheehan. She may know some of you. And it was written up in draft notices recently. But what the outcome of this, we had about 30 people attend, and the outcome is that there's now a sort of growing little group in the New Haven area that unfortunately couldn't participate in this webinar, but they are discussing a strategy for the coming year. They're part of a Unitarian church, a social action committee there, and this is going to be the major issue for them in the coming year. And one or two of them went to this February workshop, and they got some ideas and became interested in the issue. And there's another new group starting in northwestern Connecticut in a different part of the region from my own. So if you guys can reach out to your local big organizations like War Resisters League or American Friends Service Committee and ask if they could provide training, or reach out to Rick if you're in his neck of the woods, that would be worthwhile, because you want to try and spread the word about this activism.
Thanks, Seth.
And people need training. People need training and support and feedback.
And also, when we send out this packet, that might actually be a place where you can jump off from, because you'll take a look at it and then you'll see some of the things that have been done and some of the resources that are out there, and then you'll be able to maybe pick what your next step should be based on that. But hopefully we'll put enough information in there to answer most of your questions if you have any that weren't addressed here. But you can always contact us. I put my contact number and information up there because I do this full time, and unfortunately there aren't others doing it full time because the resources haven't been available for a few years. But that is how you can reach somebody live if you need to. Okay. Well, then I think we're going to wrap up here, and thank you again for participating, all of you. It's been useful to us to have you here, and watch for an email that's going to be coming pretty soon. So,
thank you.
Thanks again. You can all sign off.
All right, thanks.
You can do it, guys. Thank you. Thank you.